Welcome back. End of Empire. We continue. Welcome back. End of Empire. We continue with the French and Indian War scenario in this Compass game. We are entering the spring turn of 1756. We've had a couple of things happen. So, first of all, the French fleet has arrived, and the British fleet did not. Therefore, the French fleet, so when the French fleet arrives, it can go anywhere along the coast, all the way up and down. And there's advantages to being in some of these coastal hexes near the enemy because you can blockade them in the fall, assuming there's not a naval combat that happens later in the year. Could have brought them up here. But what I actually chose to do with the French fleet, because we're playing the full scenario with the southern map, I actually brought the French fleet down here into the Gulf of Mexico, into the New Orleans coast. And what I'm going to do, hopefully this year, is I'm going to put these units in New Orleans on this ship and sail it and do an amphibious landing somewhere in British controlled territory. I haven't quite decided where I'm going to do it. There's a lot of options. I could send the French over here to Newfoundland or Nova Scotia and try and attack some of these weakly held areas to disrupt their supply and so forth. The other option is I could land them somewhere in the colonies and potentially attack where there's some weak forces, especially over here in Massachusetts, Boston, or Rhode Island here. So we'll have to figure it out. It's going to take a couple turns probably to do it. We'll see. And the British go first anyways. The British did get some reinforcements this turn. They did get the 60th Regiment, who's actually a very good unit. He came in and chose to land in New York. And then obviously the provincials are back on the map now in spring in their home areas. So, the one other thing that happened is the British are now allied to the Delaware, and the Mingo came back on side for the French. So we've got some Indian skirmishing possible to happen down here. We could actually potentially ambush these British here. None of these British units have ambush factors. They're both 0. So that could be a good option if we can get the Mingo to activate and ambush these guys. But the British go first, and with the British first activation, they did manage to activate the provincials here in Schenectady and march them up towards Fort Carillon or Fort Ticonderoga. And they, unfortunately for the French, they tried to intercept that unit going in, and they weren't able to do it, even though Dieskau is a really good leader. But sadly, that unit was able to fortify the fort there before the French could do anything about it. The French are hoping to ambush that single unit and then be on top of the fort to attack it next turn, but that did not happen. The British are going to continue their activations. They're going to try and pour some of these provincials back into the fort before the French can go. So next we're going to check for the Connecticut provincials. They need to roll a 2 or less to activate. Let's see what we get. They do not activate. And then we're going to check for the New York provincials here, and we'll see what they get. They need a 2 or less. They do not activate either. So 20 strength points of defense for the British are not able to make it back to the fort, and that's going to probably lead to a French attack, assuming we can activate Dieskau. We'll see how it goes. The British are also going to want to move up the 60th, which arrived. They also need a 2 to activate. They do not activate, so they are stuck unloading in New York. And looking around the map, we have to be careful here about the French amphibious assault force that made its way over here. The British did redeploy the Nova Scotia militia here, but they're not very powerful. So the British are going to continue. They're probably going to try and activate this force here and attack that particular fortress there. And I will check back in when something of note happens. All right, well, the British played with fire a little too much. This provincial unit from New Hampshire was activated, tried to move in to reinforce the fort. The French were able to successfully intercept from their position here at the south end of Lake Champlain with basically Dieskau's entire stack. He left behind a detachment to hold the fort there. And so the French are attacking the British here. They intercepted in. There's no ambush because there's a fortification there. There's an outpost. We just go straight to linear combat. So linear combat here, we add up the factors. The British have 21. The French have 19. So it's a 1-2 attack. +1 for Dieskau's 1 combat value. -1 for the fortification that the British are under. And then the French rolled a 3, and on the 1-2 column, that is 1 casualty to each side, plus the attacker must retreat. So the French are going to take a hit to one of their regulars, and the British get to choose. They're probably going to take it to a provincial. Those are, if we flip this guy over, he goes down by 2. It looks like, yeah. So we'll flip the New Jersey Blues over, and they're going to go back in the fort with Shirley. We do have to check leader loss. Let's see if we get any leader injury in that one. No leader injury, unlike Braddock. Shirley is safe for now. And so they're just going to go back under the fortification, and that's the combat. The French have to retreat, and they're going to retreat back to their fortification. And now it's going to be interesting to see on their turn whether they make an attack again or try and get in some more units. We'll see how that goes. As we're starting turn 7 here, I have to make one correction, and that is the French fleet that arrived last turn in the spring 1756. It doesn't actually have to go down to the Gulf of Mexico in order for those units to do an amphibious landing. As long as I have a fleet on the map anywhere, it's sort of abstracted. The French can move those units. And so I'm just going to change my placement a little bit before I do the roll for this turn. I'm going to have the French fleet come here into the Gulf of Maine space, primarily because we want to try and hopefully at the end of the year blockade the ocean supply out of Halifax for these British units if we can. So, and that's just one correction I wanted to make. All right, well, with the beginning of 1756, the state of the game is going to change pretty dramatically, as you would expect for a French and Indian War game, where we saw really just sort of limited skirmishes along the frontier, with the exception of this victory here by the British. Now we have some serious reinforcements coming into the game. So Abercrombie has arrived from England. James Abercrombie. He's not a very good leader, but he did arrive with 2 more regiments of British units, actually 3 more regiments of British units, all of whom are 6 strength. This one's 10 strength, a couple 4-step British units. That's going to be huge for the British. They're going to want to bring that up into the inland and get to the French before the French can take this fort. We've also got the arrival of the Pennsylvania provincials here. Maryland provincials. We've also got the Pennsylvania militia available. So the British starting to slowly build their strength. The French, on the other hand, got their biggest reinforcement stack of the game, or maybe the second biggest, but most importantly, Le Monsieur himself, General Montcalm, and he is very, very good. +2 in battle. He's a ranking commander right now for the French in North America. He's a 6 activation, which means it's nearly impossible to fail with him. There's a couple edge cases where it can. We also got Lévis. He's also pretty good, a 4 activation +1 in combat. So they've dropped in here in Quebec. They're going to come down. Montcalm is going to take command of the forces here in Lake Champlain, and we're going to redeploy D-Scout somewhere else. Probably maybe up here to the frontier, maybe potentially to try and take back Fort Duquesne. We also had another leader all the way down here come in for the French, and I decided to put him in New Orleans, and that is Bourg-la-Mac. Because I need to be able to activate this stack and get them into the fight. They are small. They're just battalions. Well, except for this guy. He's a pretty good regiment. Although I don't think he's allowed to move. I got to check what the box movement factor means. Let me look at that real quick. Box movement factor. Yeah, so he has to have a leader to be able to move. He can't move on his own. But he's got artillery built in, which is nice. So we're going to try and activate them this turn to try and do an amphibious landing somewhere. He's not a great leader. I just needed him to activate the units. And I need the better units over here on the frontier because it's about to get spicy with the British now in command of a sizable portion of reinforcements from England herself. Well, it's getting saucy now. Montcalm marched down from Quebec, picked up a stack. He's now besieging the fort here. Abercrombie had a choice. He activated from New York. He could have gone up this river and reinforced here, but Abercrombie really wanted to secure Fort Oswego and drive off the French. He actually he burned down the Oneida Indian village here, but was ambushed while doing that. He didn't die, but he did take a step loss. Not a huge deal. The Oneida have been knocked out for a couple of turns. On the French turn, we had Bourg-la-Mac, all the way from New Orleans, sail up the coast and land here in Alexandria, Virginia. The reason he's doing that is the French feel like this is their best opportunity to try and get this fort back. They don't have any particular units in here that they're going to be able to use, and so what he's going to try and do is, with this landing, come up this river, try and take this fort, and if he can do that, really if he can block this river here, these units are going to be out of supply. This road is not yet constructed, so they have to trace down this road here to Fort Cumberland, and if they can't trace from Fort Cumberland, or through Fort Cumberland, through down this river to this supply hex, or Alexandria itself, then they're going to be out of supply, at least for this year. And so that's what he's going to try and do. But we did just get a naval, we're at the second summer turn of 1756. We did get the British fleet entering play. And that means there's going to be a naval combat. And this is, I'll show you how this works. So the French fleet was already here, so it will win ties. The British fleet decided to come in the Gulf of Maine. It does not want to let the French fleet blockade the Northeast in the fall turn. So they're going to do a combat. Basically, we just roll a die for each fleet. That's how it'll work. Whoever rolls higher is the winner. And the British are the winner. So the British fleet shows up from Europe, drives off the French fleet. The French fleet goes on to the next turn that potentially could come in. And now the British fleet controls the Gulf of Maine. They've won a naval victory. That is pretty solid for them. Yeah. All right. So with that being said, that means actually what this means is that now if the British get reinforcements, they can drop them in anywhere in the Gulf of Maine zone. Falmouth is in here, Portsmouth here, Gloucester here. They probably wouldn't do that. Well, they might. It depends on what their routes of advance are up in this direction. All right. So we are done with that. So I'm going to continue playing, and we'll come back when we see probably Montcalm is going to make an attack here on the French turn. All right, fall of 1756, and the British are in a much better position than they were previously. They've gotten some new leaders arriving. The Earl of Loudon has come in to the map this turn. Unfortunately, he didn't get to activate. Most of the British forces in the south failed their activation roll, so there wasn't anything happening. But Abercrombie did succeed. He moved up the river here from Lake Oneida. He dropped off a detachment of British regulars here at Fort Oswego. He wants to maintain control of that outpost, and in fact, I need to put a marker on them to show that they are within the outpost. Here on the shores of Lake Ontario, that's going to be big. He wants to lock that down for British Indian conversion every turn. And then he took another detachment of really strong British regulars, the 60th Regiment, two regiments from the 60th Division, I guess this is, or 60th Brigade. And they marched from Fort Oswego south to here. The Levis, with some French provincials, was located here in the Cayuga village. He failed to do the intercept, which is what he wanted to do for the ambush. And then Abercrombie moved in with his units. There was an ambush combat where this regiment took a step loss, and then we had linear combat. By the way, after that, this Native American went away. Then we had linear combat with these really weak French provincials. It was a very outnumbered attack, and in fact, the British wiped out these French provincials. Now they can come back. They can be with replacements every turn back up here in Montreal and Quebec. But that meant Levis was captured by the British. However, in the skirmish, Abercrombie himself was actually killed in the ambush, actually, which is really bad news for the British because he was their most potent leader in terms of activation rate on the map right now. So that's a huge loss and maybe a tactical error, or a strategic error, I should say, for the British attempting to secure Fort Oswego. Now, all that being said, we do have very strong British forces in the neighborhood of Lake Ontario, and slowly pushing the French back out of these access routes into the British colonies. So the loss of Abercrombie, not great for the British, but the capture of Fort Oswego and the elimination of Levis' sort of irregular force here will probably pay dividends as we go forward. On the previous turn, Montcalm tried to do an attack here on the fort. It was an exchange of losses, and he was forced back up Lake Champlain. We're going to try again on the French turn. It's only a matter of time before that falls. And what was really bad was that Loudon failed his activation roll, so he couldn't reinforce that fort. So it looks like the French are going to take that. We are going into the winter turn. That's going to rejigger some of the British units. And I got to finish their turn, and then the French are going to go and see what they can do to respond to this British offensive. In the meantime, I'll tell you what's happening here at the end of 1756. We're in the final winter, end of the year. Not a lot happens on winter turns. The French have successfully taken both the fort at Grand Pre, or the town at Grand Pre, and actually I should put a town marker on that to indicate that that is where he is. And they have taken the Fort Edward, the town of Fort Edward, which is good because that is one of the regions they need to bring in some Native American allies. Should also put a town marker on them. I'll do that in a moment. We did have the British here break out and take Fort Cumberland. Fort Beausejour overran the French provincials that were stationed there pretty easily. So kind of a back and forth. Montcalm had the most success on his turn. They finally managed to punish the British at Fort Ticonderoga, took Fort Ticonderoga, garrisoned Fort William Henry on the other end of it. The other end of the lake, which obviously happened historically. And they even managed to bring down this stack to Fort Edward here near Saratoga. And that is where Montcalm's offensive kind of ended. He didn't have any more movements to attack Loudon. Loudon's been reinforced with some pretty strong militia, but it may be worth the attack anyways because militia are dispersed after a single battle. So even though they provide the combat strength, and there's some good ones under here, the New York militia is 11 strength. Those are provincials. Yeah, they got some provincial units as well. So we're unsure what we're going to do with the French, but certainly Loudon doesn't have the forces to attack. So he's just got to kind of sit here and block Montcalm's advance. We're going to try and build fortresses in these two spaces to make it really hard for the British to retake this. This is about the only area on the map where the French have achieved success, and obviously, as you would expect, Montcalm is the main reason for that. The British, like I said, have captured Fort Oswego. They're trying to build a fortification there, and they've run off the Cayuga Indians, taking some losses in an ambush. So that is where we stand. I'd say the British probably have made better progress than they did historically, but Montcalm's offensive here and the number of leaders that have died on the British side is not going to help him in the long term. One other note here is that when Abercrombie died, I forgot to do this, he's immediately replaced with Gage, who is basically the same quality of leader. I had to fetch him off the turn track because normally he comes in on turn 21 when Abercrombie would be normally withdrawn, but Abercrombie's dead, so Gage is going to take command right now. All right, well, we're here at the end of 1757. We're in the first winter turn coming up here, which is the end of the year for 1757. And we've had kind of an eventful year, actually. The French definitely got the better of the British down the Lake Champlain waterways here. Montcalm marching a really huge stack here to Fort Edward. Obviously, you know that. What's really changed for the British is the sheer number of reinforcements they've received over the course of the year. As you can see, just a titanic stack of forces. Here's a 4-step regiment that has arrived, 10 strength points, a 2-step regiment, more regiments. Really, Britain sending in the cavalry, as it were, to the New World, to the colonies. And under Loudon's command, they've taken up a preparatory position in Albany, and they're getting ready for the spring of 1758, and they're going to attack Montcalm very hard. Now, the reason Montcalm hasn't pieced out of there is because Montcalm is actually carrying a pretty good stack of French provincials, the Coureurs de Bois, I believe they represent, and there's 6 points of ambush there. Now, I'm not entirely certain that that's going to do much against well, you know, it might actually. A lot of these British regulars have 0 ambush combat strength, and so I think what Montcalm is hoping. Here's Rogers Rangers, by the way. They're going to be part of this attack as well. I think what Montcalm is hoping is that he can get off an ambush before retreating. With an activation rating of 6, he's going to be very difficult, impossible actually for him to fail evading battle there. So he wants to get an ambush off. He may be 1 round to combat, and then he's going to peace out back up the valley and just take positions at all of these forts. And he's cleverly placed more ambush-capable units here at Fort William Henry. He's got some regulars there at Fort Ticonderoga. That unit, by the way, should have tried to, at the end of last turn, build a fortress there. Let's see. Was not able to build a fortress there. And then we've got a fortification here with some French provincials as well. So there's a really big battle shaping up here, but it's probably not going to happen until spring as the British use Albany for a staging ground. And as you'll notice down here in the foreground, more British regulars have landed in the fall of this year. Another 10-strength regiment, another 5-strength regiment, actually 3 more 5-strength regiments. So they're going to be able to move up here, assuming they can get an activation, and reinforce Loudon's army. And that's going to make Loudon very keen to use that manpower and push the French back up the river, back into Canada. Down over here in Nova Scotia, we've had some skirmishing back and forth. We actually had a French ambush on, where are they? And then we had these units come out of Fort Lawrence and come down here to try and take back Fort Edward. There was a battle, but the French regulars that had sort of taken over the town managed to fight off these Canadian provincial units, and so we're kind of in a standoff there as well. If the Canadian, well actually, and now in winter, these provincial units are not going to be able to do much, and at the end of winter, they're going to have to redeploy to Fort Lawrence. Elsewhere, the French, Vaudreuil, the French got some reinforcements as well. We've got Barry, who's the French best unit, 10-point regiment, 6-point regiment here. who came in along with a 3-point regiment. They all came in from France and landed in Quebec. 3 straight turns, Vaudreuil failed the activation roll, 50-50, and he failed it. So they're stuck in Quebec. They have not been able to get down the river and meet Montcalm, where they are most needed down here. We did have some French provincials get recruited back into Montreal and Trois-Rivières. They actually moved down here to Fort Frontenac because, as you remember, Gage was coming up this direction after dealing with the French allied Native Americans. And he was getting ready to collect his units and go take Fort Frontenac. But he decided to take a different tack. So when he saw that there were some French provincials who had managed to gather up a bunch of the Native American allies, including the Caughnawaga, who are really good. Look at that, +3 ambush strength. They managed to consolidate their forces here on the shores of the eastern shores of Lake Ontario. And because of that, and then the French actually recalled Dieskau from Nova Scotia. I wanted this stack to have high activation rating, the ability to intercept on command, essentially a 5 or less on the roll, to be very powerful against sort of British regulars marching through the wilderness. So seeing that, Gage decided that he was going to take a different tack. He left a pretty sizable strength unit here in Fort Oswego, and actually that unit should have tried to build a fortress this turn. See if he was able to do it. He was not. He left a sizable unit in Fort Oswego, came up the shores of Lake Ontario, ended up destroying the French garrison at Fort Niagara. That's really good for the British because that's another one of the key locations they need to get the Native Americans on their side. And wouldn't you know it, the Mingo ended up switching sides after an ambush out here against the British that came out of this fort. Here at Fort Duquesne. They were ambushed and forced to retreat, and then the Mingo disappeared. And when they came back, they decided that they were going to join the British, along with some of those units who did get ambushed. They were able to make their way up the river to Lake Erie. And now what Gage is going to try and do is collect all these units and potentially go the north route and come all the way down here and force Dieskau to withdraw to this fortification. So it's a pretty interesting situation. It really depends on the activation rolls. There are turns in this game where the activation rolls fail and not a lot happens and it's pretty dull or really frustrating when you're trying to get some regulars to where they need to go. And then there's some turns where there's a flurry of activity and some interesting stuff happens. So that's where we are at the end of 1757, and we're heading into 1758, and I suspect that it is going to be the British Anno Mirabilis, the Year of Miracles, because the French are about to get pounded pretty hard by all these reinforcements. One last thing I should point out here is that Bourlamaque's ill-fated expedition from Alexandria was essentially all hope of that one was lost. His plan to march up here. The British fleet arrived early in the year, so they're blockading the Chesapeake here. That means he's going to be out of supply. There were some battles between some provincials in and around here. Bourlamaque tried to retreat. He actually managed to fight off most of the British units. As you can see, there's nothing left in Maryland or Virginia. And then he got an activation and he made a break for it. He's trying to get to Georgetown down here, this unblockaded port, before winter sets in. And I don't think he's going to make it because the British are blockading this entire sea zone for supply purposes. So he's got a bit of a problem. You know, maybe had I moved him, if I take a look at the South map here, is there a way to trace all the way back to New Orleans? Let's see, where's the Mississippi River? Oh, it's all the way over here. Yeah, it doesn't look like, well, let's see. Actually, if he had stopped up here in Kingston, when he traces supply, he can follow this, but he can't, I don't think he can use the roads. I'm not sure. The supply rules in this game are not very well laid out. I was thinking, you know, this is all British-controlled colonies, but I guess he wouldn't be able to use the roads. I was thinking he could use the roads all the way to follow this river all the way up to the Mississippi and then all the way back to New Orleans, but that doesn't really make much sense, so we'll have him end where he ended. He's going to try and make a run for it. He just needs to get here to Georgetown. If he can do that, he'll be in supply. The Battle of Fort Edward has begun. Loudon getting an activation here in the spring, and he is moving in to attack Montcalm's position. There's going to be an ambush here by the French. It's 6 ambush points in attack versus 6 ambush points in defense. So let's roll that up real quick. That is a 1-to-1 ratio. Let's roll the die in the tray. That is a 3. That is actually no effect. So Montcalm's strategy of trying to ambush the British did not work, unfortunately. And now we go to linear combat, and this is going to hurt. Loudon has 64.5 strength. You know, he's got some provincials and some militia who are going to be half strength in there, but still 64.5 with the British versus 2, 4, 6, 18, and 5 is 23, so 64.5. Ooh, that might be 3-to-1. Let me do the calculation on that real quick. Nope, just 2-1. It's going to be 2-1. Montcalm is going to be giving a -2 on the attack because of his combat value, and Loudon has none. And then the fortification that the French have built here is going to be another -1. So -3 to the British roll on the 2-1 column. Let's roll it up. Ooh, that's a good roll. They rolled a 6. -3 is a 3, and at 2-1, that is 1 step loss to the French. So the French are going to take a step loss here, and I think what they're going to do to preserve their strength is they're just going to lose these provincials, these 1-step provincials that they have to take a loss from under Montcalm. And now the French have the option to, the French have the option to try and retreat, I believe. All right, so after that first round of combat, we do have to remove any Native Americans and militia from the battle. So the New York militia is going to next turn's reinforcements. They'll be able to come back. Basically, provincials and militia are kind of infinite for the British. Then the French have the option to retreat. They're going to use Montcalm 6 here, so they can't fail this. And they're going to take that option. So they're going to leave this fort. I believe I'm doing this right. Now, there's this distinction about units being in a fort versus not being in a fort and who's got to fight and when you can possibly exit. I would have exited with all the units with Montcalm's 6. They wouldn't have failed the reaction when the British moved in. I believe I'm playing that right. And so the French are just going to retreat. Let's have them actually retreat up the river to there, because I want to make sure that they can use their movement points when Montcalm activates. All right, so the French have retreated. The fortress is no longer there, assumed damage in the fighting. And now we've used 10 movement points to attack Montcalm in Fort Edward. So if we roll initiative again, we can keep moving and potentially do another attack. But the British here, Loudon has moved up the river. Let's roll, see if the British can continue. They'd be able to do one more attack against Montcalm's force. Ooh, they get it. Okay, so we're going to have a second combat, and I'll show you what happens from that exchange. Well, I forgot to do one thing, and that was check to see if the leaders had any outcome from that battle that they just had at Fort Edward. And it turns out, in a crazy circumstance, they both rolled a 1, which means they had a leader poor fate, something happened to the leaders. Then they rolled again, and it rolled this, which means both leaders were captured. So somehow the army captured both sides' leaders. So Montcalm is now a prisoner, as is the Earl of Loudon. Now, you can always get your leader back by exchanging it for another one, but that does mean that the attack... the attack can continue because the stack without Loudon did roll a 1 on their continuation. What it does mean, though, is that so as the British went up the river, they encountered this sitting there. Oops. They encountered that sitting there. And then the French would have tried to roll for reaction, and they need a 1, and they don't get it. So there's going to be another ambush and another combat, without leaders this time. Well, not very good for the French. Without Montcalm and his beneficial DRMs, the British marched in with just a huge stack. Loudon being captured, I guess they were motivated. They ended up doing 3 step losses to the French, eliminating these provincials, reducing this regiment here, the Béarn Regiment, and forcing the French into a retreat. And so the French are going to retreat into Fort William Henry, where they are now definitely going under the fort, because there are not a lot of French units left here. The British absolutely crushed them. Losing Montcalm was very bad. The British would take losing Loudon for Montcalm, making that trade every day of the week, and so that's a serious setback actually for the French, because their clever strategy of ambushing the British all the way up the Lake Champlain Valley is now in shambles. Well, on the French turn, as promised, Dieskau came in and confronted Gage, who had marched around the north side of Lake Ontario to try and take this fortification unawares. Unfortunately, Dieskau made his roll, and had 9 points of ambush strength with these Native Americans and these French provincials. And they just rolled a devastating ambush to Gage's stack, who only had 1 in ambush defense. That's going to be, it's the maximum column for an ambush, and a 4 is going to be 4 step losses to Gage's force. That is absolutely huge. And in fact, I think it eliminates every single one of these British units. Gage himself probably going to be killed. Let's see what happens. Gage himself is captured by the French. And I'll show you the captured leaders here in a second, because we're going to have an interesting hostage exchange. But that essentially eliminates almost every single unit here. So the French get to choose the first one, or the British get to choose the first one. They'll choose that one, and then the French will choose one. This is a three-step unit that goes down to 2 steps here. Actually, let's do it like this. Let's have the French choose these Irish. Boom. Yeah, we'll do it like that. And then, so that's 1, 2, 3, and then the French choose the next one, and we'll do 4 there. So that has greatly diminished the British presence north of Lake Ontario. Gage, that just goes to show you the power of ambush in this game, I guess. Gage has been captured. This ambush took place here. Or here, actually. And now a bunch of these Native Americans are going to go home, but it does leave Dieskau here with a pretty competitive French provincial stack. He's got to retreat, actually, after that ambush here. And so now the British are on the run up in the north. Oh, and a quick correction, actually. In an ambush, the owning stack is to choose the losses. So I'm actually going to keep this regiment and get rid of these guys down here. And now we're all set. All right, so here's the leader hostage situation right now. Both Levis and Montcalm, the French, are captured by the British. Both Loudon and Gage have been captured by the French. There's going to be an exchange of prisoners next turn, and both sets of these leaders are going to get put back on the map. And so it was very critical that ambush against Gage went off, because now the French can afford to exchange one of these guys for their good leader. You're forced to take the lower ranking leaders first, so that middle number, the higher leaders, have to get exchanged first. So if the French wanted to exchange, they would have had to exchange Levis for Loudon, and Montcalm would have still been captured. However, now that Gage is under their command, we'll be able to swap both. That's huge for the French. They need to regroup in a big way. Summer 1758, the British flush with leaders, and most importantly, Wolfe is on the battlefield now. He's going to be able to negate Montcalm's DRM advantage, but also Amherst is in, Forbes is here. We're going to be able to launch the amphibious assault against Louisbourg. The French put Levis out here to cover that. It's not going to last very long. There's not very many units there. The French have been tied up. The British came around last turn and managed to recapture Fort Edward, so now they've got the French pinned in the corner over here in Nova Scotia. And with this many leaders on the map, it's going to be real easy for the British to have their way with their units. More British regulars reinforced here into New York, and that's going to mean this giant stack can move up this river, go up this way, and approach Montreal and Quebec sort of at 2 angles here. Montcalm is going to be eventually, probably at the end of this year, going to be forced to withdraw back to Montreal and possibly even all the way to Quebec. So it's on. All right, we've reached the winter, the end of 1758, and the British have made great headway against New France this year, primarily thanks to, in the 2 turns that Wolfe and Murray and Forbes and Amherst have been in the game. They've absolutely crushed the French. There was a pretty grindy attritional series of battles over the summer. Amherst marched up from Albany with this big stack, and Montcalm and him faced off here at Crown Point, back and forth. It was pretty attritional, both sides taking losses, but Amherst had the bigger army, so he was able to afford to keep that up. And the British actually rolled pretty well here. So they've moved up Lake Champlain pretty nicely. While that was happening, Wolfe came up from Albany in this direction. He wiped out Dieskau's ambush force here at Fort Frontenac and took control of that, and then moved further down the river past Lafayette. And that forced, he was, very close to Montreal, and that forced Montcalm to have to withdraw from Crown Point with some forces to protect Montreal. It's real thin for the French at this point. The British advance is just extremely overpowering. Montcalm made the difficult decision to leave enough of a garrison at Crown Point to make the attack the British have to make here 2-1 in the hopes to bleed off more of Amherst's forces. While he tries to gather some sort of defense in Montreal itself. I don't know how tenable that's going to be, because Wolfe's Wolf's army is pretty fantastic, and obviously the canceling of the DRMs here is going to make it sort of a net advantage for the British. It is winter, so it's possible Wolf doesn't activate for the next couple of turns because these are -2 activations now. So Wolf will be a 3, Amherst will be a 2. So things might slow down to the beginning of 1759, but the British are on a clock at this point. They do need to get everything taken care of by, I believe, this turn here, turn 36. Or excuse me, we're here in the beginning of, or we're here, end of 1758. They need to, by turn, you can't see it, by turn 29, they have to have taken and knocked France basically out of the war. So they need to have taken Montreal, they need to have taken Trois-Rivières and Quebec. Now, they have already accomplished some of this in Nova Scotia, where they basically took control of Nova Scotia. Louisbourg, the French fleet has actually been doing very well this year. The French fleet has been out-battling the British fleet in the Gulf of Maine every turn. Unfortunately, the British just this past turn. Oh, actually, you know what? I did that wrong. We're in a winter turn, so we should not have had fleet deployment. So the French fleet is here in the Gulf of Maine, and they've all year have been fighting off the British with attacks. So they're going to get to go one more winter without having to worry about Louisbourg. But Forbes is here, and he's got a small stack, still 11 strength points. That is going to be more than enough to knock out the garrison under Levis at Louisbourg as soon as we can get an amphibious assault in, and that's going to mean that the British need to take control of the oceans, and they just need to win a battle against the French fleet. It's been pretty tough so far. Let's see, if I look at the charts coming over here, let's see. Fleet availability. When we get through turn 22 and 23, when we get to turn 24, the French fleet's only going to come in on a 1. And so it's very possible that in the spring of 1759, we're going to get Louisbourg falling pretty decisively. And it seems like only a matter of time at this point before the British win the game. I don't see how the French win this at this point. They just don't have the strength points. It would involve some really bad rolling on the British attacks, or some failed activations in a below average rolling either in attacks or activations. And I guess anything could happen, so we are going to play it out. But of course, we do see that 1758 was the year the British turned it around. Just the amount of manpower they brought to North America overwhelmed the French, who didn't match that. So I'm going to play through the winter, and then what we're going to do is go to a part 3 of this series. And at the end of that, I will give you my final thoughts, since we have, the amount of activity that's going to happen between now and the end of the game is going to be fairly minimal. So.